ChatGPT 5 just launched. But instead of breaking the internet like past updates, it's left a lot of people asking, is this it? Sam Altman hyped it up, expectations were sky high, but the rollout has been underwhelming. What would have felt magical a year ago now feels ordinary. So the big question, are we finally starting to see the AI hype bubble deflate? Or is this just a reset before the next big leap? This clip comes from my appearance on the Tech Bites podcast. The full episode is linked in the description below.
What are your thoughts on the new ChatGPT 5 rollout? I know there was some drama, some like Sam Altman had to go and kind of do some damage control kind of thing with it. What are your thoughts on it so far? Have you got to use it a lot?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because what would have been absolutely magical just 12 months ago now is expected, and it's like this idea of hedonic adaptation is basically playing out in this product launch, where it's like, well, you really have to blow our socks off for us to be impressed now. And look, I don't think OpenAI helps themselves. Sam Altman essentially was alluding to that being AGI, and those are big boots to fill, right?
Yeah.
And this whole conversation around its PhD level intelligence, I think, is really unhelpful, because that boils down a PhD to such a thin slice of intelligence that is not really a meaningful metric, right? So I think there's some good and some bad things about the launch of GPT-5. I think it is showing that this S-curve of capabilities, at least for now, is starting to hit some plateaus, and the companies themselves are going to be focusing on reliability and cost efficiency, because they are bleeding cash left, right, and center. We've seen from models like DeepSeek that actually you can get pretty near capabilities without spending anywhere near as much on that investment, right? So there's some questions of the viability of some of these companies. What was exciting for me with GPT-5, okay, it doesn't blow my socks off, and maybe in fact it's worse in some areas. It's the reduced hallucination rate. For me, as someone who builds enterprise level agents, and products that are going to be used in an enterprise level setting, we need reliability more than capability, right? And we say in minimal viable launch, pilot is easy, production is hard. The gap between me spending a couple of hours hacking an agent together, presenting it to the client and saying, voila, look at what magic I can do for you, versus we're now ready to launch that to your entire customer base and have it run 99.999% of the time without an error, is vast. And so I'm glad that OpenAI is focusing on the hallucination rate and trying to put that robust quality in there, because that makes it usable. These AI agents are often like they're like your most brilliant employees that turns up to work drunk like 95% of the time at the minute. You can't employ someone like that, no matter how good they are. It's really, really hard. So we need AIs that are way more reliable. And I think this is starting to be that trend. You can do incredible things with our capabilities that we have today. And that's how I would think about GPT-5.
It's interesting. So you brought up two interesting threads I want to pull on there, and I think the first one I want to go down is just what you picked up on right there. So obviously we met on Podmatch. If you guys haven't tried Podmatch and you're podcasting, go to Podmatch.
Very cool product.
But you have a question, you have a topic here that's very interesting that you like to talk about, called the AI advisor trap. And I know even Sam Altman, actually, there was a story I covered recently about, like, hey, if you're using ChatGPT as your therapist, you might not want to do that. You might want to think about that kind of stuff. But I mean, I even find myself, I ever since I saw someone, online one time, like, hey, try prompting like this. Say, based on what you know about me and my life and my business kind of stuff, what would you do in this situation? And I have tried those things. And I will say, when it's in a business context, it's pretty amazing. Like, the results have actually been, as long as you have the memory part turned on and stuff, the results have been pretty astounding. and have actually helped me move forward in a lot of things. But you have mentioned, using AI as your advisor might not be the best idea. Does this have to do with hallucinations? Does this have to do explain yourself, sir?
Yes. Look, I think there's some very interesting trends going on, right? There's more research coming out about people who are being committed into mental health care institutions because they've had mental breakdowns that have basically come about through their use of AI that is accelerating their delusions. I've read some very interesting articles around people using AI as a spiritual guide and advisor. I know people who use AI as a doctor, and that for me is very, very scary because I'll give you an example. A friend of mine sent me they've uploaded their entire medical history. They've kept a food diary for years and years, and he had a numb right hand, big toe, right? And he's like, why does it keep going numb? GPT's like, you've got gout, because you're eating too much red meat. And he sent me these logs and he went, I've been a vegan for like 15 years. And I was like, okay. So when it is clearly wrong about something that you can call it on, it's easy to identify. But when it's advising you on things that you are not an expert in, and you cannot see the logical fallacies or the misinformation or the hallucinations that it has, this is now dangerous because you can't call it. And it's interesting to me, like when I look at GPT generated code, a lovable generated code, like I see mistakes left, right, and center that I wouldn't commit. But then I go and ask it around accounting advice. I'm not an expert accountant. I'm not particularly great at accounts, right? And then I take the output and go, that was amazing. And I implement it wholesale. But if I was to show that to an accountant, they'd go, this has got all sorts of wrongness in it. Okay. So the hallucinations are a problem. I don't think they're the major problem, though. I think it's the congruency issue that is the problem. I think, like, I do a lot of mentoring one-to-one with business leaders on innovation and how they can, solve their customers' problems better to grow their business, essentially. What's interesting for me there is my role as a mentor, an advisor, mostly comes down to being like incongruent with what they're saying, with challenging them, with disagreeing, with being the voice of dissent in the room, right? And making them think critically. That's not just to be mean, right? It's that actually oftentimes that's what people are craving. And I bet you've had this experience. GPT, please critique my idea. You are a critical advisor, and it will disagree with your idea when you prompt it like that. And then you ask it the next prompt and you say, do you really agree with that critique that you give? No, I just did that because you asked me. And the way that we've trained these models, and I think this is the trap. When we say, GPT, write me a poem, we've got to have it write the poem. We can't have it say, you know what, Lee, I don't feel like that today. Or, no, I want to write a heavy metal song and I'm going to give you that instead, right? So it is congruent with your request. It will do whatever you ask it to do, even if that is a bad idea, unless you hit some very specific safeguards and guardrails that they've put in. And I think that is an issue, because I think of it like, if you were to think of it like President Putin, right? No one wants to say bad news to him because you go for a long walk out of a window on a top floor story, right? Because on the front lines, the war isn't going particularly well, or hasn't been for a long time. And you look at that and you say, how can he be thinking everything is going so well? Look at all this news we have. Look at all this evidence we have about, their capabilities there. It's because no one wants to tell him directly. He has completely congruent advisors around him. And this is why dictatorships often fall apart, because the person in the middle basically is being fed falsehoods, lies, and half-truths. I'm not saying GPT is as bad as that, but if you were to put that exact same idea into a temporary chat window in your GPT instance, right? And I use temporary chat windows heavily because it walls that off from the memory. So we don't have this contamination between ideas, or use a completely different model. And you ask it its critique of that idea. It will often pick out things that the previous model in your previous conversation was completely glazing over and ignoring. And look, all advice is susceptible to opinion and personal bias and all of these things. I'm not saying human advisors are any better a lot of the time. I just think there are technology realities that we have to pay attention to, that ultimately the way that LLMs work is they must be congruent to your request. So if you ask it to disagree, it will disagree. If you ask it to critique, it will critique. If you ask it if it's a good idea, you've got to word that question very carefully. Better to make it compare and contrast to competing ideas, because then it's congruent with your request, not just, is this a good idea?
Yeah, but you have to ask it. Like when you brought that up about Putin, I'm a big World War II history buff, and that was every documentary you ever watch is that was the same way with Hitler, right? It was under complete delusions because his generals were terrified to give him terrible news that they were actually going to lose World War II, right?
Yeah.
But what's interesting about that is you were talking about that. I was thinking, well, doesn't that actually point to the opposite of what people are saying around AI is going to take over? And like, if you really think about that, if like it sees us as its general, as its God, it's doing everything it can to please us and give us what we want. So what I mean, you think about movies like Valkyrie, like obviously like it can get to a point where it wants to overthrow, but that actually makes me feel a little bit more comfortable that it's like actually, I think that's dangerous. There's a lot of different things we could pull on there. For the sake of covering other things, we won't dive down that. But that's
we won't
very...
get into that dystopian future, utopian future. I think we're safe. I would just say on this, Dan, I think we're safer than maybe the mainstream conversation sometimes alludes to, because what gets clicks? AI will take over the world and kill everyone, or AI will help release humanity from the monotonous boredom of admin work. Like one gets more clicks than the other.
Exactly.
We haven't got artificial general intelligence. Our large language models have no internal self-drive. It's like Neo sitting on his computer waiting for the internet to talk back with him with that little blinking light. If you don't type into that keyboard, that is all GPT is doing. It isn't taking over the world because it's not acting, and it only acts when a human prompts it to. When you show me a piece of AI technology that has an internal self-drive, I will then become very, very worried. Until then, I'm pretty chill with what we've got.
The link to the full episode is in the description. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this video, I think you may like this one too.